And this is Stacey Campbell.
Good morning, and thank you for your introduction, Moses. They say that once you go to prison, you're never quite the same again, and I can certainly attest that that has been the case in my life, although perhaps not in the most conventional way. As a young child, I grew up and used to tell my mother and father two things that I wanted to do when I grew up. The first thing I wanted to be was I wanted to be a cashier at the local Dominion grocery store. And the second thing I wanted to do was to smoke. And I used to drive my grandmother crazy, taking out all the pen casings from all the ink cartridges from all the Bic pens and dragging on them and leaving them discarded around the house. Well, on life went, and I had other more sophisticated plans. But I will tell you that one of those plans never included prison. But that's how life goes. We often don't end up doing what we planned. Before prison, I started working, prior to finishing school actually, as a controller in a direct marketing company north of Toronto. And I stayed there for 10 years. And every good controller knows what the business is up to, and I knew that they were getting ready to sell. And so I liquidated all of my investments that I had, and along with my husband, we purchased the business. We went on and worked very, very hard and stayed another 10 years in the business. And just before we finished, I did a large acquisition of another similar company with 3 subsidiaries. And I loved business. I loved the corporate world. We had a good life. We had built our dream home, and we settled in there nicely with our two children. But in my own life and in my own thoughts, I really was looking for more. I didn't know what it was that I was looking for, but I knew I was looking for more. And it wasn't so much that I wanted another job. I wasn't looking for another career. But what I was looking to do was find meaning and depth in my faith. I was looking to move beyond the church walls and actually live out this faith that I claimed. I have been a follower of Jesus Christ since I was a teenager, but I wanted to know, what did that really look like to live it out authentically? In the faith I profess, God is predisposed to four different categories of people: the widow, the orphan, the immigrant, and the poor. And I wanted to line up there. While I sorted out what this might look like, I returned back to school and completed a Master of Divinity degree in missional leadership. And part of the culminating project of that master's degree was to go and start a spiritual project somewhere in the community where you could prove leadership competency. And in my research of what I wanted to do, I found prison. And that was what started the road. So I became a volunteer of Prison Fellowship Canada, and a very, very committed volunteer. We sold our dream home, and we moved so that I could be closer to the prisons. At Prison Fellowship, we work with 4 different groups of people. We work with offenders, we work with ex-offenders, we work with their families and their children. There are 350,000 children in Canada who have an incarcerated parent. And we work with victims. One of the first offenders that I met was Michaela. And Michaela had been given a sentence of 4 months in order for a crime that she claimed she was innocent of. And so we got together and we worked with the programs that we do that could probably best be described as moral rehabilitation. And we started to talk about truth. And we started to talk about it a lot and what that meant. And it wasn't so much that it was about being a good person as it was living without shame and without fear, and that truth could do that for you. Well, I went away for 2 weeks vacation and came back, and the next time I saw Melissa, she came running into the visiting room to see me, and she said, "You're never going to guess what I did." And what did you do? Well, I got thinking about what you had to say and what we've been working through, and so I wrote the judge in my case, and I let her know that I'd lied about everything. I lied about being innocent. I lied about all the details of my case. Certainly took me aback. So the day came where she had to go before the judge and face the judge, and the judge asked her a number of questions and really didn't know what to do with her and remanded her back into custody for 30 days. 30 days came and went. She went back, same thing. The judge asked questions, remanded her back into custody. On the last day that Michaela would see the judge, she sentenced her to 12 years with no possibility of parole. It was a sobering time. But I will say, for me, the transformational power of God in a prison and what happens to people was something that I could not bear witness to anywhere else. In the justice system, there are two main ideas about what justice is. The first idea holds is that a convicted person should suffer, and they should continue to suffer, and they should suffer for their entire time that they're incarcerated, and they should suffer again when they continue to suffer when they get out. But this is not justice. This is vengeance. This is retaliation. This is punishment. But punishment is not justice. It's also very short-sighted, because the common adage is that we lock them up and throw away the key, let them rot. But the truth is that we don't throw away the key. They do come out. The sentence does end. And in Canada, 400 ex-offenders are returned to our communities across Canada every day. True justice is about making things whole to the best, to whatever extent possible. The idea that somebody must pay is really, really strong in our culture. And I'm suggesting that we need to rethink that. At PFC, we're not against incarceration, not at all. But what happens when somebody gets arrested? And what happens during the time of their incarceration? And what happens when they're released from prison? These things strongly determine who comes back to our community. The other idea that I see and that I participate that gets carried out in the justice system is working towards healing and working towards transformation and wholeness. While there's little sympathy for offenders, the reality is that most of them come with stories of trauma themselves, layer upon layer of trauma. In Canada, more than 80% of our female offenders are sexually abused in childhood. And in our male population, 75% are sexually or profoundly physically abused in childhood. This puts them on a path of lower education, lower social status, mental health, addiction, and so the story goes. The miracle is that if we can subvert the message that you are worthless, you are the scum of the earth, and we can come in and say, your life has purpose, your life has meaning, we can actually move people toward, God moves people toward healing and transformation. Whole and healed people do not harm others, but abused and rejected people might. I hail from the corporate world. I love the corporate world. It's what I miss most in the work that I do now. But corporations have a long history of rejecting ex-offenders and in a very broad brush, no exceptions manner. But this is done at great cost to the ex-offender. It's also a great cost to the company, and it's a great cost to our communities. Company management might reactively think, well, I'm not hiring ex-offenders around here. But we have to think about who's actually in prison. And what about here's some stats here for you to read. I'll continue on, though. What about, you'll see on this presentation, too, that this doesn't equal 100%. So the balance that is not covered on here are not nonviolent offenders. What about the kid, the dumb kid that makes a mistake, has a bag of weed in his car, and 20 years later still has this conviction? Or some kid that goes on a joyride with a motorcycle 16 years ago, but now still has a criminal record and can't get a job. One of the most surprising statistics to me in my findings and in my work was that only 5% were actually violent offenders. These are the ones that we have a constant diet of through the media and we hear about, but they're only making up 5%. That's not to minimize their crime or their victims. We work with a guy, I'll tell you another story. We work with a guy by the name of Corey, and Corey works at the LCBO. He cannot work for the LCBO because Corey has a criminal record. So the LCBO hires another company that pays Corey his salary, and Corey comes to the LCBO each day and works in the factory in the line. They pay 4 times his salary in order to be able to do that. In fact, you pay 4 times his salary every time you visit the LCBO. And Corey's crime? When Corey was 16 years old, he was kicked out of his own home. And his criminal record is 32 years old now. What he was charged with was stealing food and clothes from his home. He didn't break into a stranger's home, he broke into his own home because he was cold and he was hungry. The fear of hiring an ex-offender is very real, but I want to suggest to you that it's more based in the unknown rather than reality. Most of us know the very wealthy and entrepreneurial Richard Branson, who owns the Virgin label. And he was invited at one point by a good friend named Jane to go to a prison and spend a day in the prison. And he really quickly saw what the plight of these men were going to be as they left the prison. He went on to visit a trucking company in Australia where they had hired 480 ex-offenders, 10% of their workforce, and got to know them, got to know the management, and found out that number one, they were profoundly grateful. They were loyal, they were hardworking, and at the time and for the duration he studied, none of them reoffended. He now has a policy in all of his own Virgin companies that they hire ex-offenders. The system is deeply flawed, and if society's failure had a trophy room, the prison is it. Still with my company at this time and still volunteering, I decided to hire 3 ex-offenders myself. So that's what I did, and I had the same experience. They were profoundly grateful, they were loyal, they were hardworking, and for the duration of the time that I had my company, they stayed with me. I found the work so fulfilling and that it really connected all of the pieces of me. I found that depth in my faith, that I was responding obediently to Christ, whom I followed, and his love for the poor, his love for the oppressed. And so shortly after I came into prison fellowship, I sold my company after 25 years, came into prison fellowship full time and was asked to take over as CEO. With my observation that the corporate world is so disconnected, I really had a burden to bring these two worlds together. And so I approached a management training company in Guelph to build us a game, and a professional board game, actually. And so that's what we did. We took 9 months to build this game, and we called it One Life. And then we invited, through a friend at Intricity, I was offered the opportunity to speak to 25 corporate executives. And so we built this game and we took them into the prison. And we played it with executives from Coca-Cola and the Royal Bank and McDonald's. And we brought along 12 offenders that were in the prison, as well as the warden, the deputy warden, and all the management staff. And what do you think happened? They played this game. It was built on the 3 pillars of stability that every person needs: stable employment, they need stable housing, and they need stable relationships. And the game simulates the first 30 days out of a prison, what it's like. And at the end of every day, you see, am I moving closer towards prison, or am I moving closer towards reintegration? Well, we had these CEOs, and they were going to win. They were going to beat the system. And what do you think happened? 80% of them could not win the game. With all their education and all their experience, they couldn't do it. And I wanted to, I'll just show you a picture of, there we go, some of them playing it. But I wanted to share with you some of the comments that they made. It would have been easier for me to go back to prison. That was a comment we heard over and over. I'm trying as hard as I can, but I can't win. I had to cheat to make it work. But I still can't make it win. I think one of the most memorable ones for me was a fellow who came to me crying. He was the head litigator from a very prestigious law firm, who came crying to me and said, I am so ashamed of the way I've talked about these people. So it was a great experience, and we went on to play it with others as well. And a number of them wrote emails, often late at night, because they had a hard time processing what had actually happened and what they'd seen. For the inmates, there were two surprising comments. One was, I didn't even know that these were the things we were supposed to be working towards. Will you come back and play it with us until we learn it? So I want to make an invitation. If you're interested in playing that game in a prison or in a boardroom, please let me know, and we'd love to have you go through that. May this be just the start of the conversation. And who knows, maybe you'll be joining me in serving life. Thank you very much. I'm supposed to stay there. I'm supposed to stay there. Was I supposed to stay on the carpet?
Well, no,
okay,
you're
okay,
fine.
okay,
You're
okay.
fine. I want to ask you, what is the recidivism rate in Canada?
So we have two institutions, provincial and federal. Provincial is where you go to await a sentencing, or you are sentenced up to 2 years, less a day. The recidivism rate is 80%. In the federal system, once you're charged, and your sentence can be anywhere from 2 to 75 years, actually, 44%.
These are astonishing numbers. Mm-hmm. When you look at a number like 80, you kind of think, why did we bother letting them out if they're going right back in?
Yeah, and we're paying $4.6 billion for that. We could build Brendan's space thing in 1 year.
But what is to be done? 80% recidivism.
My call would be to the corporate world to rethink that. Obviously, you're going to interview everyone, but that stable employment piece is key. That is the key piece.
Right. Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, thank you.